Welcome back to Keeping Shit Real. I am your host, Jessie Towns, and welcome back to Keeping Shit Real. Here we are, another week. If you're listening to this on Friday the 16th, of January that is, can we just say, who knew an autistic Barbie was going to divide the community of parents to neurodivergent children so much? But anyway, we're not going to talk about that this week. I'm going to save that for next week because I do think it's a hot topic that inclusion and representation we do need to talk about. But this week, I kindly asked all of my followers on my Instagram any questions and answers, a Q&A that they wanted to ask me, and that I said that I would answer it today. Well, when I say I was inundated with answers to my Q&A, it was an understatement. So I'm going to answer them all individually right now, and hopefully you'll get the answer that you wanted. And if you are listening to this and you don't get the answer that you wanted, or it wasn't as in-depth enough, please always DM me or email me at hello@mrsjessietowns.com. First up then, a question that I do get asked quite a lot, and it is our biggest battle at the moment is our son's control with toileting. It can be a complete refusal all day. So what I would suggest for this, and this is just, I'm not a healthcare professional. I'm just a basic bitch who has got a child with PDA. And I am obviously not a toileting specialist, because that's a bit of a hard word to get out. But one thing that worked really well for us, and I'm assuming with this question, it is more about that they keep their wee and their poo in all day and then they decide to go. Unless it's causing them some sort of aggravation, I would really just try and introduce to them like signals. Some sort of signal that they might need the toilet. Now, if they're uncomfortable because they're holding it in, then that can be, it's not great for anybody to hold their bowels in at any time. But unless they are they're having accidents and they're making a mess, this is one thing that I generally would be quite low demand about. And unless it's causing them, you as the parent, more stress and anger and like worry. Well, not anger is the wrong word completely, but it's not. It's just been allowing them to sit down. And one of the key things with children that have got PDA is to negotiate and collaborate with them, and picking a moment to sit and talk to them when that tolerance window is really high and they can withstand that type of conversation about, right, come on, let's have a little chat about toileting. And do you agree on 2 or 3 times a day that you have set toilet times? It might be before breakfast, before or after lunch, and at bedtime. Obviously, dependent on how much food they eat and drink, that might be dependent on how regular their bowels are also. But dropping absolute demands and the pressure, if you're talking about maybe potentially moving from nappies to being toilet trained, for us, my PDA was nearly 4 before he was fully toilet trained, and we had tried it many, many times, and it all went catastrophically wrong every single time that we tried to do it. So for us, we just didn't bother with potties. We didn't bother with any of that. In the end, we just waited until he was completely ready and picked a day when he had a really high tolerance level. And we just said, you know what? You're a big boy. Follow dad, I've got 3 sons. Let's just go straight onto the toilet. And actually, it worked really, really well. Now, when I was initially toilet training my eldest son, who's now 17, and he will cringe like hell if he hears me say this, and this may work for you and this totally may not work for you. I trained my eldest son and again, we didn't bother with a potty or any of that. I just can't stand mess in my house. So I just didn't want a potty. I didn't want to be walking around with all that sort of jazz. So basically, we took him out of nappies once when the overnight nappy in the morning was quite dry. What we started to do was, when that got to a point where there wasn't a lot, that's obviously and they were going to the toilet in the morning when we took it out, that's a sort of an indication then that they are got better control of their bowels with their brain. And we used to, when he couldn't get to the toilet quick enough, we would leave him in the soiled trousers, i.e. not poo, by the way, for probably 5 to 10 minutes. So he got to the level of how uncomfortable it was. And I'm not joking you, it took nearly 2 weeks to train him from start to finish. And it was it was so much easier. So that might be a suggestion. Again, it might not work because my eldest son is obviously neurotypical, and with neurodivergent children, they may have a problem processing and challenges and difficulties processing that sensory input. I hope that's helped. Right. The next question I've got is, any advice for managing intense possessive friendships with PDA? Now, this is a very, very tricky situation. So currently, and I obviously always share my own experience, because I think lived experience from other parents is really, really key. So my PDA doesn't have a lot of friends. I'm very grateful and blessed that he is a twin. So he's always got a best mate, even though they fight like fuck. But we have seen some intense and possessive behaviours regarding friendships. Now, one of them is his newly acquired friend who is in his class at his SEMH specialist school, and he also shares the transport with him. There is always that element of being honest and open and transparent with the parents to the children that they have a sort of an obsessive trait with. I have always sat down and I've been very honest with the parents, whether or not it's by a text message or WhatsApp, and just sort of said, like, these are Max's challenges, and he may display possessiveness when it comes to friendship, i.e. he doesn't want anybody else to play with them. It just has to be those two. And it can be really, really challenging, especially if the other parents maybe, don't understand, don't get PDA, but try and explain it to them in a way that it is a nervous system disability, and he or she, they may take control of a friendship situation. One thing that's worked well for us is by not having a lot of time with friends, if that makes sense. Whenever he has play dates, which are very, very far and few and very, very minimal, I'm not going to lie here, he doesn't have a massive circle of friends, which that's one of the things that makes me probably the saddest about PDA, because they do self-sabotage their friendship circles because they want to be in control all the time. Speak to the parents, but also if the child that they're friendly with is old enough to understand. But it's also about keeping a very close eye on them when they are together, because we do know that sometimes if anybody else intervenes or wants to be a part of what they are doing, that can cause catastrophic and explosive behaviour with your PDA. And we've also just seen this with my eldest son, also now has a girlfriend, and she's beautiful and we love her very much. But my PDA has become quite obsessed with her. Whenever she's here, he gets very upset if she's not sat in our living room with us. If we go out for dinner, she has to sit next to him. And we are planning on going on holiday in April, which we have invited her to come with us, so my eldest son doesn't have to, be stuck with his 2 8-year-old twin brothers. One thing that we try and do, I think there's an element of novelty will wear off with it also, but having those conversations that they can spend a certain amount of time with them, but being very aware and mindful of the fact that they might not fully understand or be able to articulate what that looks like. So I would suggest shorter maybe times with them. And if they are currently at school and the friendship is stemming from a school, speak to the school and say, one of the traits is they get obsessed, and it's an intense possessiveness. And can you just keep an eye on it? We know that children with PDA suffer from low self-esteem. So it is really more about trying to educate the people around you, not your PDA. And I hope that's helped. I feel like that was a bit of not a wishy-washy answer, but yeah. But possessiveness with PDAs and their friend is very, very difficult. And that's something that we're going to be implementing with my son's girlfriend, is that he has a set amount of time with her. And we've had a chat with her yesterday. It was my birthday yesterday. We went out for dinner. And again, he wanted to be with her the entire time. And I could see it was kind of pissing off my elder son because he wanted to sit with her. And it was just about having that grown up conversation that, he doesn't get to see her that much. But going forward for when we go on holiday in April, that we are going to have to kind of put in place a sort of a backup plan of when they can spend time together so that he feels that goal of having a friendship is ticked. Right, on to the next question. So, at what age were your sons diagnosed and how was that experience for you? So, for those of you that know me, I have 3 children. My eldest son, who's 17 nearly, is neurotypical. I have 8-year-old twins. Now, they are both diagnosed with ADHD, but it's only my younger twin that is autistic and has a PDA profile. So, for us, the twin that is not autistic and PDA is the absolute textbook of hyperactive ADHD. So the ADHD diagnosis obviously is a lot easier process. And there's a lot more facility and capability to be able to do ADHD diagnoses. That's a horrible word, isn't it? Diagnoses. And also when my PDA was in mainstream school, they triggered off the pathway referral and he was diagnosed very, very quickly. We did find that the ADHD, because obviously we do know that PDA can live also, it can be prominent in not just autistic children, it can be prominent in children that have just got ADHD also. So the ADHD for my non-PDA was very, very easy. You look at him and just watch and observe his behaviour for half an hour and you can tell. And also we were backed up by school, which again, I know that is not always the case for some parents. The autism and PDA diagnosis came that once the ADHD diagnosis had come through, we were then off the back of the observations that were done by the paediatrics team in the medical trust within the local authority that we live. They immediately the paediatrician could see that there were quite a lot of significant traits of potential autism. So they triggered off the paperwork. We were still waiting for, I would say, Maxie was diagnosed with ADHD about 4.5. We were nearly 5. He was diagnosed at 5, but he was diagnosed with autism with a PDA profile about 8 or 9 months later. Now, obviously, things have changed in those years. We're talking sort of 3 years ago now. So obviously there's been a massive increase. Medical trusts are using third party companies to be able to do them privately with right to choose options. And the autism diagnosis I actually thought was pretty straightforward. I do find personally that the Connors 7 questionnaires that they sent out, I did find those quite not outdated, but I did question a few times like how that was relevant. But I'm not a healthcare professional, so I don't know. We had 3 face-to-face assessments. So you say like assessment types. 2 of them were actually with the autistic pediatrician, the autistic diagnosis pediatrician, and that was just me, the pediatrician, and my PDA, and that was just, they were asking him questions, they were asking him to do things, they were just observing. Now, the third and final one was a bit more as I had kind of always type of imagined. It was like a sort of a large playroom, and there were a few people in there, and basically the appointment was an hour and a half long, and basically they had a load of toys out, they had some games out, and they just interacted with him and asked him to be able to do things. And they observed his behaviour, how he responded, what his communication was like, his eye contact, his hand-to-eye coordination. And in true PDA style at that point, he got really, really stressed out. So there was a few things sort of chucked around the room. But pretty early on from after that observation, The third one, about a week later, we did get a email from the pediatrics team sort of saying, like, just to give you a heads up, we are pretty close to diagnosing him with autism. This is what we observed at this at this centre last week, but we will fully collate all the information that we hold on file for him, and then we will finish writing the report and we'll send you the diagnosis. When I look at his diagnosis now for autism, he is high functioning autistic. And I look at the diagnosis, and actually, they score it on a 0 to 10, 3 to 5, but 10 being the highest of traits that they observe that match the DSM-5 manual. And I always, Maxi on that day was, they scored him basically a 10. So the highest score that you could get, they basically just scored him the highest. When it came to the PDA profiling, that was just, we had said all the way along that we feel that he displays a PDA profile. Obviously, we know it's not just a single diagnosis; it's a profile. But when after the diagnosis came through, we had a phone call from our paediatrician, and this is all done by the NHS, by the way. And I said, look, I'm still not happy. He needs to be profiled with a PDA profile. And he said, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll send you an extreme demand avoidance questionnaire out. Now, this questionnaire, if I could find this questionnaire, I mean, it's very, very generic. And there was only 25 or maybe even 30 questions. And it was just a tick boxing exercise. At no point during the autism observation diagnosis was any demand sort of written in there. But we really, really pushed for it. After the paperwork came through with the autism diagnosis and we had completed the extreme demand avoidance questionnaire, we basically then had it profiled. And it was not very, it was just not a tick boxing exercise. But what I will say is that I thought we were going to have to be observed again, and they really wanted to sort of really sort of observe him, but they just took the questionnaire and were like, yeah, profile displays a pathologically demand avoidant profile. And that is literally what his says. And that is it. Nothing else. No other support. Well, not that you get much support once you get your diagnosis anyway. It's like, here's a few leaflets. Oh, and here's a few hyperlinks. So that's our experience. Also, you've asked, how can you spot the difference between avoidance and overwhelm? So when we're talking about pathologically demand avoidance, I don't really like to use that word and that whole sentence. I'm sort of more swaying towards the persistent drive for autonomy, which is a lot of clinicians, a lot of OTs. That is more of a better explanation that fits our children. The avoidance is not really avoidance. They're trying to keep in control of autonomy. So we know what is just a normal 8-year-old behaviour of not getting his own way versus a PDA loss of autonomy. A loss of autonomy for us, we can notice very, very quickly. It will be, compared to when he's overwhelmed, is we get hissing, we get growling, we get the middle finger, the PDA salute. We sometimes get the occasional fuck off dickhead. And that's very, very different to when he's overwhelmed. The thing is, when children with PDA reach that point of having a loss of autonomy, that a lot of the time they've gone past the point of no return. And a lot of the time for us, our PDA can't even articulate how he feels. He just is angry and he just can't see anything out of it. Whereas overwhelmment, he still has the capacity to be able to say to us, like, this is too much. And an example that I can think of straight off my head is the boys were 8 in October. So we took them to Legoland and we went on a Saturday. Now, it was October, the end of October, and we kind of didn't expect it to be that busy, even with priority access passes. But there were times when it was a little bit too much. So our PDA was, because his drive for autonomy hadn't peaked, he sort of was saying to us, oh, I don't like it here, it's too busy. So there's the difference between overwhelmment and losing that autonomy, is once they've lost that autonomy and they can't control it, a lot of the time you're going to see dysregulated behaviour. However, when it's just overwhelmment, they may be able to articulate and tell you how they feel. Right, next question. How do you reduce demand without accidentally creating more pressure? This is a fabulous question. We reduce demands by, depending on what the demand is. Again, it's just like this caveat, isn't it? Constantly trying to work out and balance stuff. I mean, I thought I was pretty organised and my eye was on the ball, and before I had a child who's got PDA, and now I'm just like, oh my God. So in terms of reducing demands, we live a very demand-free house, full stop. Now, there are some things that demands, in my son's eyes, as in the loss of autonomy, are non-negotiable. So I talk about this all the time on my Instagram and like with my parents in the PDA parent circle. Is, remember, with children that have got PDA, there's two dials. You've got a tolerance dial and you've got a demand dial. So the tolerance dial is, the lowest, when their tolerance is very, very high, you can do a lot more stuff. But when their tolerance is low, we need to focus on what is just the safe and keeps them and protects them. Now, that slide can move very quickly. They can have a really high tolerance window all day. And you may experience this with your children that have got PDA, that actually there are some days when you think, oh my God, they've managed to do a lot today. And then the next day it all goes to pot. Also, the scale may move throughout the day. So always keep your eye on what their tolerance is like for that day. If they've got a low tolerance, do not create any more pressure. Just pick your battles wisely. And I always say this to parents, pick your battles wisely. If they've got a really high tolerance, then you can add more demands to them because they can tolerate it. But remember, that dial might move quickly also. Right, the next question. Do you have any tips for keeping yourself afloat whilst parenting a PDA child? Well, God, what do I do now? So I think historically, so obviously, my PDA was 8 years old. 8 in October they were. So for me, I used to run a lot, and I picked up running actually off the back of my sister died 5 years ago. And I had been running before, but we applied to run the London Marathon in 2019 for 2020. Now, obviously, we know what happened in 2020. Fucking COVID came along and caused chaos for a year. And in that time, anyway, in that period, unfortunately, she was diagnosed with stage 4 bowel cancer. And I ran the marathon with my best friend in the end. She decided she wanted to run it with me, and we ended up running it virtually. So we ended up running it around where we live. We planned out a 26.2 mile track. Anyway, at that point, we were starting to notice 5 years ago that there was something not quite right with him. We couldn't quite put our finger on it. My pre-existing sort of knowledge of autistic children was I don't know what I kind of thought out of my head, but actually at no point did I really think, oh, he's definitely autistic, and let alone PDA. I mean, I'd never ever heard of pathological demand avoidance until about 5 years ago. But just under 5 years ago. And basically, running really, really helped me. I think I felt really like I was suffocating at times. And if you can get out and run, but you don't need to even be running. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was saying that bilateral movement of being left, right, left, right, left, right is so good for your mental health. And just even getting outside, anything. I know times are really hard if you can't afford a gym membership. I would strongly advise if you want to get steps in, getting steps in is a really cheap, free way to exercise. Get outside. Even if it's only 20, 25 minutes, 10 minutes of walking can completely reduce depression, stress, and it's so helpful. So for me, de-stressing was running, but now I've got a bit of a knee injury. I've just turned 46 this week. I'm starting to fall apart, I feel. Do you know what happened to me yesterday? Sorry, just digressing here. It was my 46th birthday yesterday, and I have ran 4 marathons in the last 5 years. I've run 4 marathons. Anyway, if you don't know this, when you run marathons, it's quite likely that you're going to lose a toenail. Now, I have continually lost a couple of toenails. They just keep on falling off like they're dead. Anyway, I woke up yesterday on my 46th birthday and your girl had lost a fucking toenail. Yep, devastated. But that is how I stay afloat. I would say that was when I was in the crux of it, really, really struggling. Running, getting outside. I'm obviously a member of the gym. I do go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week, but I tell you what has really fucking saved me, and that is you lot, my community on Instagram. Now, I started my Instagram after the absolute utter fucking carnage of him not being at mainstream school and fighting, or the local authority, that old chestnut that everybody has, that it pretty much is going through at the moment, because I just feel like there's nobody is getting the schools or the support that that their child needs. So I set that up because I actually didn't know any other parents that had children that had PDA until about 13 months ago, when I started my Mrs. Jessie Town's Instagram page. I thought, surely to God, I cannot be the only fucking parent out there that has got a child with PDA. I just couldn't work it out. And lo and behold, there is 32,500 of you. And there are many, many more out there. So I think connecting with other parents is so important as well. And it's one of the things that I think I had, what's the word? I'd kind of underestimated actually the power of finding your own people. And if you're new here, it's the first time you listen to this or you've been thinking about it, obviously I run a closed community for parents that have got children that are all PDA, diagnosed or undiagnosed. We don't care if they haven't got the diagnosis. As a parent, if your child displays persistent drive for autonomy behaviours. But that is absolutely categorically changed how I handle things. I'm a much better parent from it. And I think sharing lived experience of PDA is probably the best type of therapy that you could ever get, because it's wild. This shit is like a wild roller coaster of, sometimes I am left absolutely speechless. So if you're thinking about it, come and join the PDA Parent Circle. If not, I am also launching on the 1st of February, the PDA Connect Work, which is a connection and networking hub global, where you can connect with parents and carers for children that have got PDA around the world. It might be where you live. It might be if you're going on holiday and you think, oh my God, I could do with somebody like singing on the same hymn sheet as us. And you'll be able to chat to each other online. It's going to be hosted on school, and that's £4 a month. So yeah, stay tuned for that. If you want to join, I'm also offering a free Back to Basics PDA masterclass at the end of this month, which you'll get. And yeah, that is how I stay afloat. And I obviously do go to the gym quite a bit as well. Next question. How do you get professionals to listen? They're blaming our parenting, saying that I'm too soft. Right. For starters, if you go on to the link in my bio on my Instagram account, you will see it under free resources. There is a free PDA masterclass for parents and teachers. Show that to them. But also, do not be afraid to challenge a professional's opinion. There are a lot of clinical therapists, OTs, SALTs that do believe in it. And I would show them research, I would show them articles, and I would just completely not stop going on about this until they hear and understand what you are saying. And the final question I've got is how to help during a crisis out in public, whether it's swearing, eloping or hitting or all. So again, using that tolerance versus demand dial that I was talking about, be very mindful when you're going out about looking at their tolerance for that day already. If they are showing a really low tolerance, I'm going to be straight up with you. I wouldn't even bother leaving the house. And I know that's really a sad thing to say, but sometimes it's just worth more aggro than it is ever going to be. So eloping, dependent on their age, can you get a hobbledy, is it a hobbledy down? No, there is a type of harness that you can get called a hobble down. I think I'll find it. But will a harness work? Hitting, again, we evacuate quite often in our house when things like get a little bit mental. But when we are out and about, we to keep the attention off potential loss of tolerance, is giving him things to do so that he feels in charge all the time. Because remember, children with PDA, they always want to be that, that equality, that they are the highest of the pecking order. So if you can say, right, you need to, right, this is what we need to go and get, you need to tell us which way we're going to do it, and give them a bit of control, and it might stop any dysregulation. It might also be avoiding peak times. I'm very lucky. I do work shift work, so I very rarely need to go into town or do anything at a weekend because there's a lot of people. If we're going out for the day, I'm going to be honest with you, I take my kids out of school if we're going to Chessington or not Thorpe Park or Legoland, because actually it makes my life so much easier. There's not a lot of people. And noisy places. My child with PDA will not wear ear defenders, though. He never has and he never will. He cannot tolerate them. Again, that's just another demand for him. Right. That is the end of the Q&A from last week. Thank you so much. Remember, please download, subscribe, rate and review the pod. It really, really helps with my rankings on all platforms that it's published on. And remember, if you're struggling, you want to be part of a community that totally gets it, you want live trainings, live recorded sessions, you want to be in a closed community of WhatsApp group with lots of other parents that all get this wild ride, come and join the PDA Parents Circle. It is £17 a month, but I'm telling you, there'll be no looking back. Thanks for listening. Love you. Bye.